So this concept of v'taher, Rava derives it from the extra pasuk v'taher, means that any kli that you get from an akum and the ownership of the kli has been transferred from that of the goy to the Jew requires tvila b'mikvah shekasher lemida litvolba, meaning 40 saw, and even a kli chadash, even a brand new kli that has no belia of Isur whatsoever, because it was in the bilus of a guy, requires tahara, requires tvila. Tani bar kapara, mitoch shenever b'mei nida, since the Torah says that when the Jews fought the battle against Midian and they took the clay Midian that were used for tumah, for trephus and so forth, as booty, and they captured them, then the Torah says, V'toyer, b'mei nida. Shomei ani shetzarech hazah shlish yushvi. I might think that a kli that you acquire from a guy, like in the case of the utensils that were captured from the Midianites, should require hazah b'shlishi u'b'shvi. A woman who became tameh through a discharge of uterine blood, meaning menstrual blood, is a nida, and the waters of a nida can be translated as waters of sprinkling, and is used by the Torah in this connection, in this connotation, in reference to the purification waters into which the ashes of the paradum have been mixed, that are used as part of the process required to purify things that became tameh through contact with human remains. By sprinkling the water on the tameh, or the tameh object, on the third and seventh day following the impure contact. One could understand, therefore, that this verse is teaching that a utensil acquired from an idolater must undergo sprinkling with the purification waters on the third and seventh day. According to the simple explanation, the purpose of sprinkling was to purify a utensil that was in contact with a corpse. But the Gemara is using this verse to learn the requirements necessary for any utensil that was acquired from an akum. Ach. However, the Torah says ach. And we have a principle that ach is always a miyut, ach chilek, and it limits. So it tells you that you don't need hazah, you don't need sprinkling. In Cain, matam aloma b'mei nida, ma'im shenida tovels b'hem, aviomer arboim sa. Okay, fine. Yitzrich lemichta v'toyer, yitzrich lemichta b'mei nida. Ikas of v'toyer, havamina v'toyer b'koldahu. Take a little amount of water and let the tefillah be in that limited amount of water. Because Rachmana b'mei nida, you require 40 sa. Because Rachmana b'mei nida, and it didn't say. V'toyer is hava min of erev shemesh kinida is kosav Rachmana v'toyer li alta. In the case of a nida, even if she goes to mikveh, let's say on the seventh day of the Zayin Akiyim, she still has to wait for shkia for Hariv Shemesh in order to be tar. And I might think that the kli itself requires Hariv Shemesh, and therefore the Torah says v'tar, meaning immediately the purification process is effective. Omer Rav Nachman, Omer Rabbar Avua, Afilu Kelim Chadoshim B'mashma. As we said before, even a brand new keli that was never used and has no blia still requires tefillah. Let's say old utensils, which were used for non-kosher food and have a blias iser, if they underwent libun, they were subject to fire purging, they're like new keli. And nevertheless, afilu haki, the Torah says, by tefillah, they require tefillah. The Torah requires tefillah even for a utensil that has been fire purged. Maskifler of Sheshes. If Sheshes objects, he says, why not come to the conclusion that even if you have a scissors that's used to shear a cloak, that should also require tefillah? Amalek Klei Suda, the entire parsha is talking about Klei Suda because the Torah says that you need hechsher with libun or a hagolah to remove the blias isur. So we're talking about obviously a blias isur of food, which is called Klei Suda. So a scissors does not need tefillah. It's not a Klei Suda. Like in the case of Midjan, we acquired ownership over the kalim that we took from the Midjanites, and as a result of that transfer of ownership, we need tefillah. But let's say you borrow a kli from an idolater, it doesn't need tefillah. Because the idolater still owns the kli. So only when there's a total acquisition of the utensils from the guy, that's when you need tefillah. But utensils borrowed from an idol worshiper are excluded since they will eventually be returned. A utensil purchased by a Jew from an idol worshiper that was subsequently borrowed from him by another Jew before its immersion requires tefillah. In other words, the cheft itself generates a chi of tefillah. Now, if it's passed on to another bailam, it still needs tefillah. Rabbi Yisrael bar Yosef Zavan Mona de Mardala me'akum. Right, he purchased a marda, some sort of a utensil called a marda. I guess marda means it's made of a combination of earth and cattle dung. Savarlat Bili, he thought it needs tefillah. Omalea Humir Abun Rab Yaakov Shmei, L'didim Mefarshonally Minei de Rab Yochanan. I got a clarification of what Rab Yochanan said. Klei Matechas Amur B'Parsha. The Torah is talking about metal utensils. I mean, that's what it says in the pasuk. It says oferes and so forth. So all the different types of metal utensils are mentioned in the parsha. So, for example, a wooden kli would not require tefillah, or this earthenware kli does not require tefillah. Omer of Ashi, Hani Kleis Chuches, glass, however, Hoel v'chid nishtabru yesh lem takana kiklei mateches dam. So glassware requires tefillah. And the reason for that is because if they are repaired, if they break, they can be repaired. And how do they repair? By the same process that you make a metal utensil, you put it back in the fire. And therefore Chazal gave it a din of a metal utensil because of that similarity. Now again, we're dealing with tefillah d'Rabbanan in the case of kleis chuchas. So let's say, for example, if you had a suffix, then you might be able to say suffix d'Rabbanan l'kula. Kunya is a kli adama. I mean, it's an earthenware that has a lining that's made of metal. He calls it a coating. Okay, fine. According to one opinion, the status of that kli is like the original state of an earthenware kli, and we pay no attention to the fact that it was coated by metal. According to the second Kisofo, we in the final analysis it has a metal element. Now the post can point out that metal element comes in contact with the food, meaning that coating of metal was on the inside of the kli, not on the outside of the kli. If it's on the outside of the kli, that's irrelevant, and it certainly is a kli adama, earthenware, which doesn't require tefillah. V'ilchas kisofo, we paskin that we treat this kunya like sofo, which again, sofo in its final state, it's a metal utensil. But once again, I just want to clarify that means that the metal is on the inside of the kli, comes in contact with the food. Iboilu, the Gemara has a suffix, mashkanta mai. What's the din if he received from an idol worshiper collateral, and that collateral was a utensil. So who actually owns it? Omar Mar Barav Ashi, Abba Mishkan Le Ovikochavim Kasa the Kispa. Idol worshiper apparently gave Marbarav gave to Rav Ashi a silver goblet, and it was a mashkanta. V'at b'lei, nevertheless, he went to the mikveh and he was tovla to ishtei bey. Only then did he drink from it. Lo yadana, but I, my Rav Ashi, say, I'm not sure about my father's tvila. Imi shum de kasamer mashkanta kizvini dami, and therefore, since the mashkan was given from the goy over to the Jew, from the lover to the malva, therefore the malva has ownership. Imi shum de chazi liover kacham de daite lishkue. Maybe he understood that the idol worship intended not to repay the loan, but to leave this mashkon of a silver goblet in the hands and the possession of the Jew. So as far as the issue of the status of collateral, it remains an unresolved issue. We learned in the Brayso, if it's a brand new kli, then all you need is tefillah. But if it was used with cold water, is then kigon. Kosos ketonios utzluchios, cups, drinking dippers, and flasks are only used in the context of cold. Then all you need is hadacha, you wash them out, and matbilan, and you put them into the mikveh. Notice, which we'll come back to Mitzvah later, that hadacha came first and then tefillah came second. Now we're talking about magilon and matbilon ve'hem Taurus. We need hagola, could go yoros, like pots or kettles or urns, right? All these need hagola, but then notice again that the tefillah is mentioned last. Orb, kigon, hashipudim, va'askalos, right? These spits and grills is melabnon umatbilan ve'hem Torah. So tefillah again is last on the list. And here there's gigantic controversy about the halacha, whether or not the Seder Advarim, in which we first are machshir, and we remove the blia of Easter in the kli, and only then can we retire the kli, or no. You could go in any sequence you want. You could start with tefillah in the mikveh, and then do the hagolah, libun, or whatever, hadocha, whatever you want. And some Rishonim go as far as to say that the sequence is evenly kuva. It's absolutely critical. Which means that if you started with tefillah in a mikveh, you're going to have to do that tefillah in the mikveh again after you move the blias isu through hagolah libun. Kulan shenishtamshi bahen ad shelo yatbil v'shelo yagil v'shelo yelaben. What about all these utensils? If you went ahead and you used them before you did tefillah, before you did libun, before you did hagolah, tani chad, according to one brayso, also. Hot food used with these utensils absorbs the non-kosher flavor that was absorbed in the utensil. The food is therefore prohibited. And this is perfectly understandable regarding hagolah and libun, since the purification requirement of hagolah and libun are due to the presence of forbidden flavor, that's bolua. If one failed to purify the utensil, the forbidden flavor will prohibit the food that it is cooked in. However, regarding tefillah, where the requirement is unrelated to forbidden flavor to tam surah, and it required tefillah even for new kalim, one would have expected that no prohibition should apply to food that was cooked using these utensils before they were immersed in a mikveh. The prohibition cited here might be a rabbinic enactment to prevent an improper leniency from being applied to the utensils that were used without hagolah or libun. Fine. Tanya idach mutter lo kasha. Hakim and the Yomi nosin tam lifgam osur. Vehakim and the Yomi, that's Reb Meir who holds that nosin tam lifgam is. I'm sorry, the first man the Yomi is Reb Meir, and the Chachamim hold nosin tam lifgam is mutter. So it means that the kli hasn't been used for how long, and that's a gigantic machlokes. According to some Rishonim, maybe we'll get a chance to do this even more, but it's called linas laila. If the kli stood overnight, that makes the blia into blias pogum. Others say no, you need mace lace, you need a full 24 hours. Ulamad yom no saying tam lefgam muter ki ule over kochabdas rachmana. I mean, if we took over the utensils from the goyim, presumably it hasn't been used within the last 12, 24 hours. Therefore, the time is pogum, and those times gam is mutter. So why do we have to go through this whole process of hagol and libum? Torah ela kedera basyoma. The lav nosin tam lifgamhu. So only those kalim that absorbed a flavor that's still lishvach, meaning it happened today, is then you need hagola or libum. But if it's a nosin tam lifgam situation and the kli hasn't been used for a day, mikan v'yelech, is lishtere. However, the Gemara doesn't accept this. So you read lishtere with a question mark because the Mishnah and the Bryce seem to indicate that purification is required even after the last day of non-kosher use. And the Gemara answers, Gzeira kedera shena bas yoma atu mishum kedera bas yom. If we'll allow him to use a pot that has a blia of pogum because it hasn't been used within the last day, and he's going to cook it and so forth and so on, then we have to worry that even in the case of a kedera bas yoma, a pot that was used today but with non-kosher food, and therefore it's a nosin tam l'shvach, they'll also have a laid back, view, and they won't require hagola or libra. Okay, this is where we'll stop here on Daf Ayin Vav. And I believe that tomorrow, when we conclude Daf Ayin Vav, then we actually finish Masechet Avoda Zara.